I'd like us to humor me for a moment, and I want you to think of a person in your life. I want you to think of a person who in some way has wronged you in a very severe manner. I want you to think of a person, and I know it's not pleasant, that you honestly have a hard time forgiving. That maybe you've gone through a process through your life where you feel like, okay, I've got this, I've forgiven them, but every now and then you get this little reminder. Either that person pops up on Facebook or just a memory of whatever incident they hurt you with comes to mind, and there's this pang of anger that sort of rises up again, and it's this realization that maybe I haven't forgiven. That I thought I have, but maybe I'm still very much in the middle of the process of letting go of what this person did to me. Not comfortable, but I want you to picture that person. Now I want you to imagine how you would feel if by some miracle that person got married into your family. And they're no longer just this acquaintance that you can keep at a distance. They're no longer this person that you can avoid, but they are now embedded within the fabric of your existence through your family. They make movies about this, right? They make movies about your former high school bully marrying your sister. There's actually a movie about that. I forget. It was a flop. It was in 2010. I'm like, I've never heard of this. But how would we react? I want us to think about that. How would you treat this person that you have a little bit of anger and unforgiveness in, but now they're in your family? And the reason why I want us to consider that is as we dive into the letter of Philemon, the question that Philemon will ask us to wrestle with, or one of the questions, is how do you and I interact with one another given the fact that we are part of the same spiritual family? Especially with the reality that some people in the spiritual family may not be people that we necessarily get along with, or people that we sometimes have conflict with. Because in a family, right, a family is a place where we can love one another so immensely, but we can hurt each other so deeply. Right? As the saying goes, those that we love and care for the most often hurt us the most. Why is it so easy for us? Like, I don't know about you, but for me, I get mad at my parents like that. You know, there's just a lot of emotions there. One time I got in an argument with my mom about how much water you need to boil an egg. And I was so mad I didn't talk to her for the rest of the day, right? So it's so foolish, but it's the one that we find ourselves celebrating the big moments in our lives with, these benchmark moments. We want our family to be there, but at the same time, family sometimes is the one that we find ourselves fighting with the most. And so as that's the case with our real family, the truth is in our spiritual family, things are also not very pleasant and clean. Sometimes it is tricky to navigate the dynamics of a church or the dynamics of your spiritual family. Just like family, guess what? We are stuck together. And we need to find a way to reconcile and get along and keep our eyes on what God is calling us here to do. A few months ago, I mentioned how there was a big division in my family because an aunt had sort of claimed land that was not hers. And so there was a group of cousins that I hadn't seen for years because they got outcasted because of this land situation. But at some point, someone realized, you know what? That's just land. In the big picture, that doesn't matter. What matters is they are our flesh and blood. And so we need to figure out a way to reconcile with them. And so what this letter to Philemon is doing in a big picture is this. It's going to challenge us to allow the truth of the gospel to be lived out specifically in the way that you and I interact with one another because we are part of the same family. It's going to challenge us to allow God's truth to infiltrate and influence the way we interact with people in our spiritual family. Philemon was one of the church leaders in the city of Colossae. He probably, as far as we know, led a house church. And he was also in the upper echelon of society, and so he had some slaves. He had some bondservants, one of them being Onesimus. And at some point, Onesimus did something that was very hurtful to Philemon. We don't know. He wronged him in some way. Maybe we think he ran away, or maybe we think he stole something and ran away. We honestly don't know. But by God's sovereign plan, the slave that ran away, the slave that wronged his master, who was a Christian who also had worked with Paul, met Paul and came to know Christ. And now he's in the fold of the family. So here's the situation we're encountering. There's two estranged Christians, Philemon and Onesimus. One has the right to be upset. One has the right to maybe feel very angry at the other because of what they did. And then you have the other one that maybe feels guilty, maybe feels a sense of shame, doesn't know how to approach his master. Maybe I'm guessing he feels a little bit of resentment at having to live a life of being a bondservant. I don't know. But the question they have to ask now is, how will they reconcile? Will they reconcile? Because here's what we teach. Here's what we teach. We teach that in God's kingdom, the distinctions of slave and free don't matter because we're all under the same family lineage now, under Christ. Here's what we teach. We teach that we ought to forgive one another as Christ forgave us. That's what we teach at this church. That's what the Bible teaches. That's what Paul taught in his letters. That's probably what Philemon taught in his house church. That's great that we teach it, but the question we still need to address, and sort of this theme that's been running throughout these last few months, is that's what we teach, but will we now do it? Will we allow our theology to be lived out in reality? Will we allow what we know to affect the way we treat one another and transform the way we live in the Spirit? Because in theory, all sounds great. In theory, it sounds great. Forgive one another. There's no distinction. It sounds great. But when we're faced with the uncomfortable reality of actually having to apply these principles, will we do what it takes? Will we step into it? Will we be obedient to the process of reconciling and forgiving another person who wronged us? Will we be obedient to the process of asking for forgiveness to someone that we've wronged? Will we pursue a path that strengthens the spiritual family instead of dividing it? Will we do it, right? Will we submit ourselves to God through the messy and painful and awkward process that it sometimes takes to bring reconciliation? Will we lay down our pride and our hurt? Not that we ignore what the person did, but that we let a higher truth influence our lives more so than the past? Will we love one another despite whatever another person did to us? So at a core, as we're looking into the letter of Philemon, at its core, I want us to understand that just like what we've been going through, it's really an invitation to live out this transformed life, this new humanity that we have been talking about. It's this invitation and this challenge of, will we take the gospel that says what? God reconciled us to him. Will we allow that truth to now be lived out in a way that we reconcile relationships within our spiritual family? That's the lens I want us to have. That's what we're going to be challenged to think about in the next few weeks as we look at this letter. It's only one chapter. Today we're going to look at verses 1 through 3. Here's what it says. Paul, a prisoner for Christ Jesus, and Timothy, our brother, to Philemon, our beloved fellow worker, and Apphia, our sister, and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and the church in your house, Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. We'll stop there. Here's all I want to look at today. That even though the title of this letter seems to indicate that it's addressed to an individual named Philemon, I want us to see that in Paul's introduction, it's actually addressed to in a more corporate setting. Because he's not just writing to Philemon, as the title would indicate. He writes to Apphia, who we believe is probably Philemon's wife, and Archippus, who Paul calls a fellow soldier, this colleague, this someone that he's gone to battle with in terms of ministry. And here's the important phrase, the church in your house. So today I just want to explore a little bit of this idea of this spiritual family God has put us in, this koinonia, this idea that our spiritual life was never, ever, ever meant to be lived in isolation, but it's always meant to be lived in the corporate setting of spiritual family. And elsewhere in the Bible, it calls that setting the body, where we are one part of that larger body working in unison. Look at Romans chapter 12 with me, verse 5. So in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member, I like this, belongs to all others. The person next to you belongs to you in some way. That's weird, right? Because maybe there's a stranger next to you or someone you don't like. The person next to you belongs to you in some way. You belong to the person next to you. There's this interconnectedness within a church body. I don't know if many of you notice, but we make it a point that our kids call all of you auntie and uncle. They don't say Mr. Jason or Mr. Van Schooneveld. They say Uncle Jason. And we do that very deliberately because we want our kids to understand that there is a difference with their relationship with you because you know Jesus versus their relationship with my colleagues who they call Mr. They get confused with Nick and Ann, right? Not that we're trying to be elitist and not that we're trying to be exclusive, but because we understand this, that their relationship with every one of us at this church is different because we are married into the bride of Christ through Jesus. And it is fundamentally different than their relationship with people outside of the family. My wife's relationship with my brother changed drastically the moment we were married. It was redefined by her marriage to me. Before she married me, my brother was just this chubby, jolly Filipino guy with tattoos, who if she saw him on the street, she would not think twice. But because she married into the family, we will trust my brother to take care of our kids. We give them legal rights to be the guardian of our children should anything happen to us. Her relationship with my brother changed drastically the moment we were married. And so we have to understand that when we are part of Christ's bride, when we marry into this family, our relationships with one another need to be defined in light of that. And it's very different. There's this phrase that I bring up from time to time, and I always kind of beat it down. It's this phrase, personal relationship with God. How many ever heard that phrase? If you look at when that phrase first kind of took off, before 1960, that phrase was almost non-existent. You would be very hard to find in any sort of Christian literature the phrase personal relationship with God. But in the 1960s, you see the steep growth of that being used in churches and in literature. What happened in the 1960s? The 1960s is sometimes called the me generation. The messaging in the 1960s became about us and our own independence, finding ourselves, making our own paths, being able to provide for ourselves, being self-sufficient, living the life we want to live on our own terms. It was a time when we were told that we are in control of our own destiny and that we are strong enough and wise enough to handle life on our own. Personal relationship. And so it seems that sometimes there's this thought that all I need is Jesus. It's just God and me. I don't need to depend on anybody else. I can just depend on myself. But that's not the call on our lives. The call on our lives is to depend more and more on God. And part of the depending on God is to trust in the family that He has given us to support us and to encourage us, and to rebuke us, and to push us forward. Part of the grace that God gives us, right? We can't grow on our own, but part of the grace that God gives us to mature is the ability to not be independent. Part of the grace that God gives us is the ability for us to not be independent and have to do everything on our own, but it is to lean on the family that He has gracefully and undeservedly given to us to help us with the walk. And so why does Paul make sure that he writes this letter to the church and not just to Philemon? He doesn't address it to the church just because what he's about to ask Philemon to do is something that everyone within the church should do. Paul addresses it to the church because the honest truth is Philemon needs the church's help to be able to live it out. Paul addresses it to the church because the church has to know that along this journey that he's about to challenge Philemon to undertake, the church has a role to play in certain parts of that path. Personal relationship with God. I'll say this. Our relationship with God, don't get me wrong, is personal in the sense that it's a person-to-person interaction, but it's not private. Our spiritual walk, our relationship with God is personal, but it's not entirely private. Yes, we need to involve times of solitude where it's just us and God in our room. Yes, we need to pray by ourselves between us and God. Yes, we need to study the Bible by ourselves. But the truth is, even though it's personal, it's not entirely private. Think about how we're told to pray. How we're told to pray is our Father. Not my Father, our Father. What that tells me is this. We may pray when we're alone, but we never pray alone. We may pray when we're alone, but we never pray alone, because guess what? As you pray for this church, as you pray for your family, as you pray for your friends, there is a chorus of other family members praying the same thing, and that is joining together in this corporate prayer. Even though you're praying while alone, you are not praying alone. And so that's why it's so important for us to invite people into what we're praying for. So that as we're in our rooms praying for whatever is on our minds, there's someone else that is not praying my Father, but we are praying in unison as a body, our Father who art in heaven. There are going to be times where we are called to allow the church to engage in what's going on in our lives, because it's not private entirely. There are times where we're going to be called to engage with other members of the church in what's going on in their lives. Because the truth is, nobody can do it all alone. We can't be more Christ-like by mere willpower. If you're struggling with sin, this is not the solution, right? Let's say you're struggling with some sin, some habit. You can't think this. You can't think, I'm going to just pray more. I'm going to read the Bible. I'm going to double down on my spiritual discipline, and somehow that will give me access to some mystical power in my personal one-on-one relationship with God that will allow me to overcome this sin. Can't do that. That's not how it works. It can't just be, I'm going to pray harder and pray more and spend more time in prayer. I mean, obviously that does something, but that's not how we are going to overcome. We need to access the accountability relationships, that cord of three that we talked about, that cannot be easily broken. You know what I notice? And sadly, my kids notice it too. I'm a much better father when my wife is around. I'm much kinder. I'm much more patient. I'm much more Christ-like. The moment when my wife is gone, I just am so impatient with my kids. Why is that? Because her mere presence gives me the accountability and reminder that my goal is that kids see Christ in us, that our goal is that we raise up kids who know they're loved by Christ and kids who love Christ and not kids who are obedient. Just her mere presence transforms the way I parent. And I can't just by willpower say, God, make me a better parent. Just pray that 10 hours a day. Will it help? Yes. But God has asked me to have dependence on Him, but also interdependence on the body. I mean, think about this. Adam having a private relationship with God was not healthy. That would be awesome, right? It's just me and God, Adam and God. No other people to distract me, no other people to complicate life, no other people to hurt me and make me upset. It's just me and God. But God knew that Adam alone was not healthy. He needed help. And so I would think this, that maybe to truly be human, we need to embrace our part in the larger family God has given us. To truly be human, we need to access the accountability and the help. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 19. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. Somebody phrased it this way. I like this. There are no solitary toes or ears or eyes leading an existence apart from the rest of the human body, needing only a personal relationship with the Creator, but not the rest of the body. We need each other. We can't do it alone. I mean, take this to the extreme. We can't do anything alone, in some sense. How did I get to church? I was not able to get to church all on my own merit. To get to church, I had to rely on a human being, many human beings, that engineered the MRT system. I needed to trust the people that built that elevator, right? By the way, if you're ever on the Malkong gondola, you are putting a lot of trust in humanity. If you think about it, right? I couldn't have gotten here on my own. I needed to depend on others around me. Where I see this the most is my workplace. Let me say I love working, for the most part. I love working where I work. I love my colleagues, like just the collaborative nature of what happens in the office. And that was very much important this week, because let me tell you what happened this week. This week, Ann Ho and I were asked to lead a discussion on our summer reading book, which is a book called Just Mercy. There's a good movie out about it, okay? But make sure you bring tissues. And the book deals with the very heavy subjects of racism, a corrupt legal system, the death penalty, those sort of things. And they said, can you lead this discussion with a bunch of adults? And I thought, do you not know that I teach mathematics? There's no discussion in a math class, right? This sort of thing doesn't happen. This is way out of my expertise. So what did I do? I went to an English teacher. I accessed a relationship within my working space. I accessed someone who knows what they're doing much better than I do and say, how would you lead this discussion? And I think because I listened, because I asked, it went a lot better. And what I realized at working where I work is that to function optimally, to be the best teacher I can be, I need my colleagues. I need their help. I need them to see blind spots. I need to observe them and let them model ways of teaching that I don't necessarily think about. I need to appreciate their opinions. I need to look at their ideas of best practice. I need their advice. In order for me to be the best teacher I can be, it's not just me. I need the wider community. And so, if this is something that we naturally experience, we need to understand that that truth is also a spiritual truth within the church, that we can't reach spiritual maturity unless we allow in and access the wider body and family of Christ that He's given us by grace to grow with. And so before we even get further into this letter of Philemon, before we even answer this question or explore this challenge of living out the gospel and living out this new humanity, I think it's important for us to just rest on this intro. That this is not written to Philemon. It is not for one person. It's for the church, because you and I are saved into a family, not an isolated relationship with God. That we need to understand there is an interconnectedness that we need to embrace and not be wary of, and not see it as a weakness. There is a togetherness and a dependence on one another that is not a weakness. It is human. It is by design. That there was a God who saved us when we were helpless. There is a God who gave Adam a helper when he was alone. There is a God who gave Paul, Timothy, and other co-workers to help him in ministry. And guess what? God gave us, you, a church family to help you walk this path, to help you live out this gospel that we're going to get more and more into and that we have been exploring. So can we close our eyes and let me just read Romans chapter 12, verse 5 one more time. Here's what it says. So in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all others. Each member belongs to all others. Can we have the music team come up?